I've had the privilege of sitting down with some incredible ranchers over the years. People who built something from nothing, survived things that should have broken them, and came out on the other side with something worth passing down. At the same time, I also visit with ranchers weekly who are struggling, whether in a startup business or trying to turn around a failing one. They're tired and frustrated, and they're wondering if they're on the right track. That's what this show is about. I'm John Haskell, the host of Ranchonomics, the podcast dedicated to helping ranchers win at business. Ranchonomics Stories is where we go deeper with longer conversations that describe the journey behind the success we see today, the hard years, the turning points, and the lessons that only come from living it. I want these stories to inspire us to keep going even when it's hard, to remind us that success really is possible, to drown out the voices that say it can't be done, and to reinforce our resolve to keep going until we win. Welcome to Ranchonomics Stories. Well, welcome to this special episode of the Ranchonomics podcast, where we're going to talk about the stories of people who've made it to the other side. Josh Lucas is with me today from Vermont. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here. I don't feel like I'm worthy compared to the company you've had on here before.
Oh, man, that is not true at all. So let's get into it. So this series is all about talking about sort of stories of people who've, kind of been successful in ranching. In your part of the world, we may call it farming, but either way, you're primarily a livestock business. And I'd like to talk about how you got started and some of the obstacles you encountered and overcame as you come along and get to where we are now. So you did not grow up in a family farm operation, correct?
Sort of. My parents farmed part-time. Yeah, they both had full-time careers, and then the farm was definitely just a side hustle for them.
Excellent. And what was it that made you want to get started?
So I grew up in central New Hampshire. My father built houses and my mother worked in the school system as an occupational therapist. And they had left Massachusetts long before I was born, and they bought a couple of houses and then ended up on the farm. They had a little bit of everything. They sold mostly small square bales to horse people was kind of their primary business for the farm. And then Dad had some cows hanging around that were just basically there to chew off some pasture that he couldn't bale hay off of. And then they had pigs. They had a farrowing operation where they'd farrow out pigs and sell feeder pigs every spring. And like I said, this was all part-time on the side from their full-time careers. My dad was a self-employed entrepreneur. And so we were kind of raised with that entrepreneurial spirit. I grew up with 2 sisters and 2 brothers, so there's 5 of us total. And the cows I was just drawn to the cows. They had these were your very typical Northeast herd, like very little management, very little production. They're just kind of there. I was just drawn to them.
And it's a long way to market for you guys, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And so they were just there, and Dad just had them just to get rid of the hay that he couldn't sell and to graze off some pasture that was just too rough to put a piece of equipment over. And for whatever reason, I was just kind of drawn to those cows as a kid. I'd just sit out there on the fence line and just kind of watch cows and calves, as a little kid. So I got into that. I started my livestock career in the pig business at like 7 years old. I had like my own sows and was selling pigs. And then I traded out of those into cattle, 8-10 years old. And then I finally got into breeding stock. I think I was 13 or 14 when I bought my first bred heifers. And so just really got hooked on the cows and didn't really have a plan for it. Just had a little money that I had saved up from buying and selling other cattle. And this is all just as a kid. And my parents supported all that pretty well with
That's awesome.
4-H projects and that stuff. We were big into 4-H when we were kids. We never went on vacations or anything or any of that stuff. So it was more like, going to fairs was our getaways from the home place. So that's kind of how it all started. And as far as I actually bought registered Charolais, which is kind of funny because they were like 6 feet tall. They were giant, old school Charolais from France. And now we're like a totally different operation where we have nothing that resembles that. That would be a white elephant on our place today for sure. So
Right. Oh, that's neat. So as a kid, you had a pretty good start there. You knew if you had Charolais, you must know how to feed something. So that's a good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We fed hay probably 300 plus days a year to that herd of cows. So I guess I'd back up and I'll kind of tell you where we're at today and kind of where I am before I get too far ahead of myself. We're in Western Vermont. which is only like 40 miles from eastern Vermont, but narrow, small state. So we're in the
It's
Champlain
40
Valley,
miles,
which
but
is,
it takes like 16 hours to drive across it, right? 'Cause
yeah,
roads go
exactly.
north, south, east, and west all at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and they follow rivers the entire way. Nobody can make a straight line. Where I am is pretty rolling hills, open. We're in what they call the Champlain Valley. So it's the kind of between the Green Mountains of Vermont and the Adirondack Mountains of New York. And the Champlain Valley is open, rolling clay hills that grow grass like crazy and absolutely beautiful country. I don't necessarily love the state of Vermont, but I love where we live as far as it's a gorgeous place and it's fantastic grass growing. So
And
I've
you say
been,
that in May, but tell us a little about the winter.
yeah, so the winters can get long. The valley that I'm in can be kind of a little banana belt that stays pretty warm most of the time and pretty open. This past winter was not the case. We're coming out of a very long winter, but most of the time, so we'll have bare ground at least once a month through the winter. So even if we get snow, it doesn't usually stay. So and we winter graze the cows pretty much almost every month. We can be grazing cows if we stockpile enough forage.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, it's high rainfall, 40 plus inches a year is average. It's almost too much at once usually. So Lucas Cattle Company is kind of my primary business. I started that in 2006, straight out of college. Went to Ohio State Agricultural Tech for 2 years. Got a associate's degree in beef production. And after 2 years of college, I was ready to hit the workforce. I was done with school. That was plenty. I enjoyed college, probably a little too much most nights, but 2 years was just right. I didn't see myself doing anything, going to work for any corporate or operation or anything like that. You know, a lot of the people that went on to the 4 year degrees ended up working for pharmaceuticals or nutrition companies or any of that. I had zero interest in that. I just wanted to work with cows. The associate's degree was just right. The program I went to was fantastic as far as they didn't try to sell you on anything, more inputs. Our professor was very old school, moderate frame cows, low input production. He was kind of behind his time, but actually just in the right. I think the way he taught was set us up perfect to succeed. It certainly wasn't after chasing the maximum all the time. It was optimizing. And I've tried to carry that forward all the time is we don't ever try to maximize anything, we just optimize. So after 2 years of college, I was basically, well, I mean, right before I finished college, took a small business course. That was one nice thing about technical schools is there's a lot of focus on the business side of things when you run through those programs. So I took a small business class and had to put together a business plan for that as kind of like my final project or whatever. And so I did it on a commercial cow calf operation. Had to dive into a bunch of the details. You know, it was like a 50-page business plan by the time I was done and researched. And I think at the time I was looking at like northern New York for land, mostly just because it was one of the cheapest land values I could find. And
Yeah, for the production, I think pretty reasonable. Yeah.
yeah, and luckily I didn't go with like kind of the area I was looking for because that gets like 6 feet of snow. It's out by Buffalo, New York, and it's like I didn't know that key little detail on why that land was probably so cheap. So it's a good thing I didn't like go chase after anything out there. So I finished up this business plan and I worked pretty hard on it. And I met with the professor at the end. He had like a sit down meeting with each kid, and he's like, "So you going to do this?" And I was like, "No, I'm looking for a job." And he's like, "Why not go do this business?" And it's like, I don't know. It seems like, kind of a far fetched thing to just jump in and go full time right out of college. And he's like, "Well, what's holding you back?" And it's like, he's like, "Do you have any debt?" I was like, "No, I worked my way through college and had scholarships and did pretty well. So I didn't have any debt coming out of school and only went for 2 years. So wasn't way behind there." He's like, "Well, what do you have?" I was like, "I got a pickup truck and 10 cows at home." He's like, "You don't have a family to support or any of that?" I was like, no, just a single guy. He said, "I don't see anything holding you back." He said, when do you think you'll do this?" And I was like, "Probably when I'm like 35, 20, 30, 35, go work for 10 years. That was kind of the plan, work for 10 years, save up as much of my check as I can, and then start the business. And he's like, when you're 35, you're probably going to have a wife and a couple little kids. And it's probably going to be a lot harder to leave whatever job and security you have at that point to go do this business. And that really rang home. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So I still wasn't quite sold on the idea. And I interviewed for a couple jobs, basically cowboy jobs, for the whopping $12,000 a year or whatever I was going to get offered for salaries back then. This is 2005, I think. So wasn't really looking into any high paying careers. I was like, I'm never going to save enough to buy a new pickup, let alone start an operation in 10 years. So I didn't take any jobs. I was offered a few jobs and I passed on them, and basically spent that. So I finished off schedule because I went on internship partway through school. So I finished in December, and I spent that whole winter basically like trying to find a place to do this and actually get it all nailed down. Spent the winter doing that. And I think it was by March or April, I had found a farm to lease in Vermont. Actually, it's 10 miles south of where I ended up today. Found a farm with a gentleman that was running two businesses and wasn't running either one of them well. And the bank told him he needed to find somebody else to rent his farm to, so he could focus on his other business that had a lot more debt. And so it was kind of a win-win for both of us at the time. It gave me a place. He and I had kind of parted companies later on, but at the time, for somebody to give I was 21 at the time, for somebody to give a 21-year-old kid basically the keys to their property. Looking back, I'm like, I don't think I could do that here with something. So he either must have been really desperate or just was, willing to take a chance on a young kid with a dream. So, yeah. So, and he and I were really good friends until the end, basically. And then we kind of parted companies. So that was 2006. So we actually just hit the 20-year mark.
20 years.
Yeah. End of April, beginning of May. There was no exact date, but that was we just had our 20th year anniversary for the business. So that was kind of a cool milestone to hit without really noticing. I don't know where those 20 years went. So we started out with basically this business plan, a rented farm, 12 cows, a pickup truck, and a gooseneck trailer. And no idea, no financial literacy at all, hardly, except I did know what a profit and loss statement was. I knew what a balance sheet was.
Good. You got that in college, right?
I got that from college, and that was huge. I knew what a cash flow statement was. I didn't know how to use one other than tracking things after the fact. So basically that spring, I took what I borrowed. I think I borrowed a bunch of money from my siblings, and like my kid sister was still in school, and I'm like, well, you're not using this money, invested in here. And so it's probably a terrible investment for her. It took a long time for her to get paid back. I know that. She did get paid back. But so then reality set in. I moved over here and found a room to rent and was just living very cheap, just as cheap as possible. Because what I didn't understand at the time was cash flow and how important cash flow was to that situation. I was looking at starting a cow-calf operation, buying yearling heifers, breeding them, without any real thought as to how I'm going to get through the next 18 months to get there.
Right. Because it's a while till that first calf.
That's a very long stretch before you have cash flow. And it's a good thing. Like I said, my landlord must have seen something in me that he liked, because he was more than willing to let me slide on the rent every month, every once in a while when we needed to. And the house I was living in, the landlord baled hay, and I used to go through square bills for him and paid off my living expenses that way that first summer. And so it's just kind of like hodgepodge, and it didn't really matter. I was 21. Like, I didn't need anything. I needed to buy dog food for my dog and a little bit of, food for myself. And that was pretty much it. So
pretty good weight loss program for both of you, I imagine.
It was. It did very well.
No obesity problem there.
Exactly. So then I ended up at the FSA office because I was trying to go through. Went to the Small Business Administration because I heard they did business loans, and they kicked me straight to FSA. FSA says, all right, well, you first need to get denied by a bank. I'm like, well, that's going to be easy. So I called my local bank and I was like, I just need a letter saying that you don't want to work with me. And they're like, well, you want to like submit an application? I'm like, I don't think I need to. And so they just wrote me the letter. I was like, I want to start a farm business from scratch. And they just wrote the letter. So,
I love it. Good.
yeah.
We definitely don't want to loan this kid money.
Yeah, exactly. So I ended up at the FSA office and I have very mixed emotions about that 20 years later, if that was the right decision or not. So first things first, I think we were looking for I was looking for money to buy breeding stock or cow-calf pairs or whatever I could get my hands on. And this would have been in May of that year. And let's see, I think I was looking for like $90,000 or something like that to get fully stocked. That's what I figured it would take to get this farm fully stocked at the time. And bear in mind, I think the first bred heifers we bought back then were like 70 cents a pound or something crazy.
Yeah,
Like
awesome.
it
Right.
was a good buying time compared to today for sure. And they ended up, FSA was like, well, I think we'll give you like half of that. And you can buy a tractor with part of that and cows with what was left. And at the time, I thought I needed tractors and equipment and all that stuff. I was very ingrained in that very conventional thinking that you're going to do everything yourself and produce everything yourself and own every last little bit of everything. So the FSA office basically gave me half of what I needed. After the initial meeting, I didn't think she was even going to work with me. I thought it was even a stretch for them at that point. But they did, and I ended up having a good relationship with that loan officer for quite a while. She was good after the fact. I wish they had been a little more willing to kind of get me fully stocked at first, because it was kind of like it hamstrung me a little bit, where we didn't have enough cattle to really generate enough revenue to pay for the lease and everything else that was associated with it. So I was in kind of a predicament there to some degree, where we just we bought everything we could, and that was kind of the end. That was all we could do. So I basically hadn't even heard of custom grazing at that point. Didn't know hardly anything about it. But the farm I was leasing, the other business my landlord had was actually a USDA slaughterhouse, and it was right there on the facility. So it worked out really well because it got me connected to a lot of people locally that were in the business right away just by being in the same space. He introduced me to everybody that pulled in with the trailer practically. So that was good. And so we ended up, there was a company that had a whole bunch of steers out with custom grazers around the Northeast. And like August, they started trying to bring them in for slaughter, and they weren't big enough, and everybody was out of feed for these things and stuff. So I ended up taking a bunch of those and doing custom grazing before I kind of even knew it was a thing. And that doesn't
Fantastic.
say much in my college education, I guess, that hadn't even talked about custom grazing. That's what you get when you go to a technical school, I guess. They don't details. So I ended up custom grazing for this. It was a grass-fed beef company, right? And so, like I said, I had gone to school in Ohio, so right in the middle, right on the edge of the Corn Belt. Anyways, so I thought this grass-fed thing was just insane. I thought these
Kind of
people were
stupid. Yeah.
crazy, just kind of stupid, and quite frankly, 20 years ago, the beef they were selling was pretty bad. They were just lanky, unfinished steers, basically, is what they were calling grass-fed back then. It certainly hadn't been fine-tuned as much as it is today as far as the marketplace.
For just a quick side note, the first and only time I've ever had to use the Heimlich on a person was at a grass-fed beef event put on. It may have been in association with the Quivira Coalition, but it was down in New Mexico, and I think it was Lassiter's or somebody that was telling us about all the health benefits of grass-fed beef, and they put down the worst steak I've ever eaten in public. And the guy behind me choked on his, and I actually stood up and did the full on, like I think I cracked ribs and everything. Piece of whatever shot out just like it does in your CPR training video. And anyway, not a great promotion event, I'll just say that. But this was the 90s. I think this was even earlier, middle 90s at that point. It was quite a while ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right for that time. So, anyways, we custom grazed and had our own cattle, and I did have some cow calf pairs that year, and we were able to sell some calves in the fall and generate some cash flow. And I had, I think it was kind of just like shooting arrows at anything that would pay me a little bit at that point and finished some freezer beef. Some of the heifers that we bought that didn't breed, I finished them off and sold them as freezer beefs and did that nonsense. And then the following spring, so my second year here, I actually got hired on. It was a 400 cow organic, basically birth to finish organic operation. And I got hired on there as a herdsman. They had just gone through a managerial change. The new manager knew about farm management, but that didn't necessarily know beef cattle in general. And the place was kind of a wreck. And so I hired on there as a herdsman. So I worked there basically like 30 to 45 hours a week and then did my own stuff on the side and kind of brought that place, kind of helped, I should say, helped to bring that place out of the dumps and get the cow herd kind of straightened back out. The cow herd was a total mess. Year-round calving essentially wasn't supposed to be, undernourished. And like I said, it was organic and it was just kind of a total mess. But they were feeding everything out. So I kind of had some feedlot experience from my time in Ohio. And so it was a really good fit as far as for both of us, me and the manager. And we got along really well. So I started there and that was a good fit that provided some cash flow to live off of. And for that first year while the business was still kind of growing. And when you asked me to do this, I started thinking about all the little enterprises that I had through those early years. And I did a little bit of everything, I think. So I won't try to bore you with every little arrow that we shot in the sky, but I hauled livestock. That was kind of my big side hustle. I had the truck and trailer and had the slaughter facility right next door. There was always something that needed to be picked up. And so that helped provide some cash flow. And then I got this other side job and was doing kind of all three, trucking and my cattle and the side job. And I was thinking about it, that side job, I worked there for 7 years, I think. Got to see a lot of cattle and a lot of health issues and a lot of things, especially I heard that was so let go and need to be kind of brought back. And I learned more on that job with somebody else's dollar than I ever would have on my own. And it would have been a lot more expensive had I learned all those about cattle on my own place. So even though I jumped out of school
Awesome.
and
What a great opportunity. Yeah.
yeah, I started a business right out of school. I think there's a lot of merits to working for somebody else
Mm-hmm.
for some time because it's paid education basically. If you're dealing with somebody else's problems, even if the wages aren't good, you learn a lot that you can apply to your own business. And then we kind of moved into like some natural beef for a while there, and so there was a lot of crossover between the organic operation and the natural stuff that I was doing on my own. So that was a pretty good job. And so in those 7 years, I started leasing up other ground around town. So around here, it's primarily dairy farms, and the small dairy farms, the small family farms have kind of been on the way out for the last 20 years or better. And there's kind of a lot of consolidation into these bigger dairies that are, 1,000 cows or better. But even still then, even when it was like 250 cows was the average dairy farm around here when I first moved here, there was a lot of ground that those dairies couldn't use anymore. When they all went to complete confinement, they let all the pastures go. Anything that they could crop was just sitting there like kind of gone fallow for 10 or 15 years. And so that kind of became my niche, was that ground that I call it, we were the bottom feeders, basically. We took what everybody else didn't want pretty much and got
Perfect.
fenced around it and got it cleaned up. And there is one caveat to that. When you're the young guy and you go in and you build fence and you take a piece of ground that's been sitting fallow for 10 years, 15 years, and then it turns green and it looks good and has a fence around it, all of a sudden everybody wants it again.
I've had the exact same thing happen to me.
Oh, it used to irritate me so bad when you go around in the spring and your landlord's like, "Oh yeah, so and so stopped in wondering if I wanted to rent the pasture to him." I'm like,
That
so
used
and
to
so has lived
drive
there
me
for 30
insane.
years.
Yeah.
Didn't touch it until I did all the work. Never lost any to that, but that was certainly something to be aware of.
Yep. I always felt terribly betrayed by that. It's like, I thought we were friends, and now you're like trying to horn in on my lease. What the heck?
Yeah, exactly. When it was all my sweat labor that made it look like something.
Right. And it's so important when you are young and looking for those bottom feeding opportunities. And actually, my wife and I just went through this little piece of property we've been playing with, but you have to be able to see the potential. Most people aren't willing to put in the work to sort of see what it could be and then do the work. And a huge part of it is just seeing that there's potential there, because lots of people can see it once it's got 18 inches of grass on it, and looks green. But when it's scrubby or covered in trees or burned up or whatever, that's when you really have to be able to see what's possible.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So we were leasing ground kind of all over town in that little town. And when I say leasing ground, I mean like little pastures that would hold 20 cows here and 20 cows there, and adding on to the cows all the time. And I had that other job to live off of, so I didn't need to. I wasn't really taking a wage at the time. The farm was paid. The farm is always paid for itself. That's kind of the beauty. I was thinking about this of starting with nothing and being broke from the start. Basically, profit is not optional. It's mandatory at that point. You can't be in the negative because you literally would be out of business, because there's nothing else to fall back on.
There's no equity to draw from to keep
Exactly.
those
There's
negatives.
no
Yeah,
retirement account to dip into or anything like that when you're young and starting out like that. So I think it's a blessing, to be honest. You can't run
I
a
would
bad
agree.
at that point. You have to run a halfway decent business. And it keeps you from doing foolish things like buying shiny paint and stuff like that, just because you got a few dollars in your pocket. So that certainly has always helped. The hardest part about now that we're 20 years in is kind of letting go of that some days, and being like, oh, we should invest in this, we should invest in that. And that can be that ultra conservatism can be hard
Yes.
to let go of.
Right. And what's fascinating to me, and I've actually struggled to convince my wife of this at times, is as you make the transition, you live on beans and rice, right? The sweat of your own brow, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a point where it's like, man, it's actually way better for us to have somebody else do this and we focus on something else, right? You keep sort of laddering up the value that you create while having more and more people do kind of the lower value things for you.
Yeah, and that's something I found after ranching for profit, right? Kind of realized, well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'll get back to that. So we bought our home place in 2013, which is like a fraction of the acres that we have. It's 180 acres out of between what we own and lease now, we're around 900 acres.
Okay. And you say you got married in the course of this adventure too, right? And
Yes,
had
so
kids.
we got married in 2012 or 11 or something, I don't know when, and had our first child. So that was kind of buying our home place was actually more of a buying a house and kind of setting up home as much as anything. The business needed a home at that point, and then we also needed a home. Right? We were leasing. I think I was leasing 4 or 5 farms, and an apartment. And we had a couple bad apartment deals where like the place sells and you got to get out or whatever. It was like needed some stability with a kid
It's
at
no
home.
different with apartments than it is with pasture, it sounds like.
Yep,
So
yep, exactly. And that's the thing with leasing when you're like we were 100% on lease land, and what I found is I needed to overlease lease way more than we needed so we could afford to lose a lease at any given time. With leasing, anything can happen, death, divorce, disabilities, people change their mind. Anything can happen with a lease. I don't care how good it's written. The last thing I would want to be is on somebody's land that didn't want me there. So we've never had that situation. We've always, been able to leave a place better than we find it and move on if we need to. So the business was going along pretty good. We kind of got into that grass finishing thing to help this other company. It was good cash flow. Kind of realized I'd send them a bill and they'd send me a check every month, and that was awesome compared to what we had been. And then I started finishing some of our own, heifers that didn't breed, all that sort of thing, and marketing them to the same wholesale company that we worked with, and also selling feeder calves every fall or spring or whenever. We weren't really marketing. It was still trying to market big groups of calves at that point. We've kind of since then gone to more of like selling small groups to direct market finishers is kind of our target market nowadays. And a lot of those cattle are leaving when they're heavier too. We're taking them up to 800 or 1,000 pounds before they actually go to that last finisher. So we ended up buying our place in 2013. I left that side job the following year because basically it was like, or it might have been the year after. I don't remember exactly. So we had a mortgage and had all these lease properties, and I think we were expecting our second child at that point. And I was like, something's got to give. I'm burning the candle at both ends. And I really, at that point, we had enough invested in our own operation as like, I need to focus on my own operation full time. So that was, I think that was in 2013 or 14, I think, actually, that I went full time with the business. So I think it was like 7 or 8 years after I'd started or something like that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Very good.
And yeah, I think that, like I said before, I think there's a lot of merits to working a side career and building your business at the same time rather than just jumping all the way in. I actually just heard Robert Kiyosaki just did a great podcast on that very topic a couple weeks ago. That's a much smarter way to start a business and invest. I think there's
a lot of people don't understand is that job is a furtherance of your education, right? Most people think, well, we go to school and then we go work, but really, while you're working, you have the opportunity to learn more and more and more. And for me, it's always been I learn more while I'm working than I do while I'm actually in school.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So we got into the land business at that point. We purchased this place, and that was 2013. So land prices hadn't skyrocketed too bad, and we were still kind of coming out of 2008, and we had some equity, or what felt like a lot of equity at the time. And then 2015, one of our larger leases, they actually came to me, and it was my biggest lease. And in the middle of winter, they're like, "We're going to get foreclosed on in 40 days." I knew they weren't in good shape, but it was one of those things. Like, I was like, "Well, let me see what I can do." Called the bank, and sure enough, we were able to purchase that property. Being in the right room at the right time. It's not being lucky. It's being in the right place, having the right conversations, always being ready to kind of jump is what made that happen, made it possible. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And we happen to be in the right place. And
There's a saying I love, and it goes two ways. It's either volume negates luck or volume creates luck, right? And thinking about like you living next to a processing plant and meeting every person that comes in the gate, it's like, man, that's just volume of relationship, right? Of people to know, people who might be able to help you out, people that you might be able to help out. So kind of cool how those things work.
yeah, and I think that's probably, I was thinking about it a lot this weekend. That's probably one of the most important things the business is, particularly as it's grown here in the last 5 or 10 years, is just the network. Like, the bigger your network, the better off you will be. And the right network, always having somebody to call for anything, that's pretty critical. So then we were 2 mortgages in. After we bought that second property, had 2 mortgages and 2 kids with a third one on the way. And I had gone into the hay business at that point to try and create cash flow. That's also a terrible cash flow business because you bale hay all summer and sell most of it in March when everybody runs out. So you sit on it and sit on all your money.
That's better than the direct consumer deal where you have to wait 3 years. This is at least
It's still better than that. And
9 months.
I was baling hay like all over. That kind of consumed my world and my business at that point. And you kind of like slack off on your grazing because you have hay to bale. I was doing it all by myself. Didn't have any outside help at that point. And so I don't remember what year it was, 2018 or something like that. Basically baled hay from like Memorial Day through Columbus Day in October. And by the end of that, I think that was when my son, Casey, was a baby that summer. So Janelle's at home with 3 little kids, and I was gone, just gone from daylight till dark. Yep. And man, by the end of that summer, we were like, everything was falling apart. All the equipment, everything, everything, nothing was working well. And I ended up at a Ranching for Profit little short 2-day course that fall. And
In Vermont, or where'd you go for that?
In Vermont, they actually got some money and got Dave Pratt. That was when Dave Pratt still owned the company. He came out for like a 2 day, 1 day. Actually, it was a 1 day workshop, not two.
Mm-hmm. Ranching for Profit came up. They came up to Vermont at a 1 day workshop, and then I think around that time they were kind of trying to make a push up into the Northeast, weren't they?
Yeah,
Because I
so
think they had designs on putting an EL chapter up there, having a regular school up there or something.
so they actually came back and did a full school in Vermont in 2019, and I took that. At the time, I had never left the place for anything. At that point, one person, crazy lunatic. So I took a Ranching for Profit, and Dave Pratt was his teacher, and totally life changing experience. And then I got into Executive Link after that. And that's when all the big changes really started to happen. Kind of started shoring up all the little holes that were in the ship and kind of focusing on. Once I learned how to kind of break the economics apart and see what was working and what wasn't working, that's what was missing. We knew there was things that were working well, we were profitable, but also knew there was some dead weight that we just couldn't identify. That's what Ranching for Profit really opened up, was that not only doing gross margin analysis, but just breaking the enterprises apart. So that EL kind of led us to some other ventures. It's when we started Lucas Family Farms, which is my second company that we started. That's our meat marketing company. So we look at wholesale grass-fed beef to stores and restaurants, fresh every week of the year. That business has grown from, I don't know, the first year I think we sold $10,000 worth of product, and now it's, substantially more than that. We're doing over 100 head a year through that. And then we added pastured eggs to that, kind of a decent fit with the wholesale beef on the fresh beef side of things.
Good. And I assume the kids are doing the eggs because your kids are old enough now to.
They help. Janelle does that. That's kind of been her enterprise. So Janelle was a stay-at-home mother for 10 years. So that was great. She's taking a job now just to get out of the house kind of thing, join the workforce again. So it's been really good. Once again, it comes back to cash flow. That business, so we deliver 52 weeks a year. The checks come in 52 weeks a year. And even if we stub our toe on something, there's still going to be money coming in next week from stuff that went 3 weeks ago. So that's been huge.
Maintain your working capital and pay your monthly bill and that sort of thing when you have that kind of income stream coming in the door.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second here because I think what you're describing a couple things really well. The first, definitely in the first 10 years you were in business, you were in what I've heard called the AFAB stage, which you will do anything for a buck, right? You were especially when you were young and single, but you had nothing, right? So it was like anything you could do that would put cash in your pocket was going to be helpful to your overall operation. And the way I like to think about the AFAB stage of your business is the opportunity cost on your time is very low. And the opportunity cost on your capital is very low because you don't have any, right? And so you don't have any equity, you don't have any capital, you just need to take your time and use it to feed yourself and to keep the thing afloat. About the time you're getting to the ranch, when you took Ranching for Profit, you had built yourself to a point where, like you said, you had some equity. Your time was actually worth something, and now it was the time to start sorting. Like let's decide, and maybe you could have done that a few years earlier. But either way, when you get there is when you get there. Now we do enterprise analysis to say, okay, what of the activities that we do are worth doing, and you get to make choices there. And sometimes that is actually a more difficult stage because for some of us that have, a certain type of personality, anything for a buck works great. And we see some ranches and some farms that stay in that type of mentality for 3 generations. The thing that you've been able to do is really pivot from that to now you have focused enterprises that actually provide value. You have, instead of saying yes to everything, you're saying no to most things. And even since then, I think you've said no to more things, right? You've kind of cut the deal down narrower and narrower. And again, the reason that the transition happens is because your time now has an opportunity cost, right? Your capital has an opportunity cost. And you therefore have to think about that very differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of my favorite sayings anymore is no is a full sentence. Like,
N-O period, huh?
yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
I've got young kids, as you know, and that is, so there takes some convincing.
I safeguard my time more than anything anymore. It's the hardest thing, you know, making more money is just a matter of cranking up production or cranking up something else. You cannot make more time
Yep.
no matter what you do. So I've gone to, and I started to touch on this earlier, starting to outsource as much as possible. Anything that I don't need to touch, I try not to. And I'm not saying I'm great, and by no ways, and by no means necessary, am I saying that I'm really good at anything. But I've identified a handful of things that I am really good at, and those are the things I focus my time on. And so we outsource the haying completely. I don't put up any feed, and we have a custom operator do all of that. Before I was doing all my own books, that is now outsourced. Fantastic. Just things like that, that things that used to take my time, I now basically I'm just managing subcontractors is one of my job titles. And now that's one of the job titles I don't like for the same reason I have to, it's a people problem. But most of it, if you work with good people, it becomes very easy. But it's getting out of that mentality that I have to do it all myself. And I hate having conversations with people that are in agriculture that think they're getting by because they did it all themselves. It is the most limiting paradigm that there is. So I'm still, to this day, I'm still pretty much one person. I utilize some part-time labor, but we run a much, much bigger business than I ever did before because I utilize those subcontractors for important key tasks that they're really good at. And when I utilize, it's like hiring a custom grazer. We just put cattle out with a custom grazer over the weekend. When I hire them, I not only get their time, I get their grass, I get their acreage, right? It's like when I hire the custom balers to come in, I get all their equipment, I get their employees, I get all of it. And all I have to do is, and most of the time they're doing it cheaper than I was doing it. That was the thing that really kind of came down to after I could do an enterprise analysis. You realize that you're not making money doing like baling hay, for example. I was losing money every acre that I covered. I was losing like $10 an acre. So that's why the more acres I did, the worse it hurt.
Or worse, yeah.
It's got worse every year. It got a little worse, and it's because I was doing a little more every time. So that things like that have made it a lot easier to streamline operations and stay focused. And with that, we've just seen compounding just take over everything, basically.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Equity, everything. And it's not that we're getting anything paid off. We probably have as much debt as we've ever had, but it's working debt that's leveraged against something that's producing cash flow. And that's really important. It's been super important to kind of, I think probably coming out of after ranching for profit, you get exposed to so much stuff, just like, Kiyosaki and just all the books and the networking and through Executive Link. I was in Executive Link for like 4 years and then followed up with, Ranch Right and ever that. Just that network, that giant network, you get exposed to so much information. And once you can put that information to work, it just compounds over and over and over, and you just snowball the whole thing.
Yeah. And there's a momentum part to it, right? There's a long flat stage at the beginning before that happens. And you've kind of turned into the overnight success that's been 20 years in the making, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you start out as just the crazy guy. Like, what's that guy doing? And then like it's funny. Like we sold all the hay equipment after ranching for profit, and right, we were going out of business was the word around town then because we weren't couldn't afford our junky old haying equipment anymore.
That's awesome. Very good. One other quick question going back just a little bit. If I remember right, your wife was part of the motivation of making a change, right? Because again, you're running a bigger operation now and it's easier and you're home more and that, you have some more of your own time, that sort of thing. Is my memory right that that's kind of how that transition
Yeah,
when
wife
things
and
were falling apart, they were all kind of falling apart, right?
yeah, for sure. Family in general. You just when you get for me, I got so into making the business work. And when I say making it, I mean like slamming a hammer against the wall to make it
Forcing
do,
it. Yeah.
forcing it. Just do it more, more work, more work, more work. And not working smarter, just working harder. And your relationships are the first thing that fail in that situation. You can say, well, whatever, I don't care. But then that starts to stress you. And before you know it, it breaks you. And then you've got the whole weight of the world on one person. And when that person breaks, that's when the cards really start to fall in the house of cards. After I took Rancho for Profit and I sat at a table with a guy from Australia, and his name was Justin Dickens. And you sit there at the table for a week, and you all get to know each other really well. And at the end, I think the last parting thing he said to me was, "Put your people first." And it's stuck with me. I put it in our mission statement actually for the business after I did it. Put your people first. And if you don't do that, you have nothing for starters. Well, the material stuff doesn't matter in the end. So like right now, dawned on me this winter, my youngest is 8 now. I have 10 summers with kids left in the house. My oldest is going to be out of the house in like 4 years.
Yeah,
And
she's getting close. So
she's 14 and starts high school next year. So for me now at this stage, 20 years in, this is where I am really glad that I started early. I have a little more freedom to take my foot off the gas a little bit and kind of not let it coast by no means. I'm still hustling and pushing hard, but just making smarter decisions, maybe hitting the easy button a little bit here and there, being able to do the things that those kids are only going to be able to do for, while they're little. And now I'm not talking about wasting time going to Disney or any of that, but just like 4-H projects and stuff like that, and being able to leave and go and do that stuff with them and do the things that, they're only going to be there for a short time. I think that's pretty critical. It's if you neglect your family and your kids, I don't think you have much left. So
yeah, that's pretty awesome. Well, okay, so you're at 900 acres now, right?
somewhere in that neighborhood. Yep.
Okay, and you've got 3 or 4 mortgages.
2.
2.
Wow.
Okay.
2 properties with 4 mortgages, I guess.
Okay. But you're able to pay them fairly comfortably. You mentioned that you have more debt, but I mean, you're not struggling with the payments at this point, right?
No, the land payments are easy. Yeah, we're like 10 years in on the land payments. Those look like the best financial decision we ever made when you look back.
Terrifying at the time you made them, right?
Absolutely, and you got to lie on the paperwork practically to get it to go through.
Hey, they've prosecuted people for that, so we're not going to go into details on
I
that
didn't
deal. But
actually lie. Oh,
yeah, when they were convicting Trump of that in New York, I was like, oh man, if they went back to every mortgage application that had inflated asset values on it, I'd be real curious to
yeah,
see how many people went to jail.
yeah, no, and that was absolutely terrifying at the time to do those. Not so much for me. So one of my personal, I don't know if it's a fault or it's a double edged sword, but I've always had very little risk aversion starting out, and I think that's absolutely necessary to start out. I think if you're worried about the risk, you'll never start, and that's worse than, in my mind, than failing is never starting.
Is your wife risk averse?
Very.
Yeah, perfect. So you guys are the perfect combination.
She did not grow up in an entrepreneurial house, so risk was not necessarily part of life, daily life. Well, it's taken some convincing to get her on board, but she signs on the notes when we need to. So
Yeah, good. Or at least somebody signs on her behalf, huh?
yeah, no, that would be illegal. But when I say we have more debt, that's more in the way of leveraging other people's money in my mind. Operating notes for feeder cattle, stocker cattle, that sort of thing. That was one thing. I was actually crippling the business by not going after that for a while, which is really good because I didn't know how to use it. Looking back, I probably wouldn't have used it on cash flow assets, and that's kind of a critical caveat to that, to using debt financing to expand a business. In my mind, is that it's backed up by an asset, and then it also produces cash flow.
Yeah. Yeah, love it.
I think that's super important.
Yeah, really good. What do you see coming up in the next couple of years for you guys?
when I was in EL, one of the last things we did was created a 20-year plan or 25-year plan. I think it was at the time, something like that. So I was like 37 or 38. I kind of hit all the goals that I had for life, unfortunately. Didn't dream big enough.
Right.
My dreams seemed ungodly big when I started, but then you whack those moles on the head by the time, you're halfway through your career. And then that was actually kind of one of the kind of most unnerving places I've been. It's like, well, what's next? Like, kind of did what we wanted to do and, you know, trying to find what was next. At that point, I'm a super planner. I love to plan.
If you're making a 25-year plan, I would say yes, that you are a bit of
Yeah, and it's just how I'm wired. And I mean, I planned life out when I was 17, and then achieved it by the time I was 40. Didn't dream big enough was the biggest problem. So, anyways, as part of EL, I kind of like did this exercise with where we basically is like, where do you want to be in 20 years, or at pick any time? It could be retirement. It doesn't have to, and then figure out however many years back it was from there. So, if you look that far out, it's easy to step back 5 years from there. So you figure out where you want to be at retirement. What do you want the business to be? What do you want your life to be? Then step back 5 years, where you need to be in 15 years to be there at 20 years. And then back to 10, and then step back to 5. And between 5 and 1, those are pretty small goals. And you get to 10, they're starting to get bigger. And by 20, it's, another big audacious goal that you're chasing after. So for me, by the time I retire, I want this business to be supporting 4 families. And I left it vague like that because I don't ever want to burden my kids with my dreams, them to have their own. If this happens to fit into their dream, I think it's fantastic. I'd love to have them. So I left it at like 4 families because whether they're flesh and blood or not, that's okay either way. But I want the opportunity to be there for them if they want to come back. So I don't want to just say, well, I'm at a good spot right now. We're comfortable. We're just going to stay here until retirement. Because I think that's a very limiting to think that. So, yeah, there's some significant expansion that would be required to get there between here and there to go from 1 to 4. I think it's doable. But I don't know. In the very short term, I'd like to find some ways for my money to make me money without me doing anything. More so, more off-ranch investing, still in the industry, but, maybe not something that I have to physically touch every day.
Yeah, love it. Very, very good. Well, this is awesome, Josh. I think I am very proud for what you've done. I mean, you guys have done an incredible job, and I know it's been hard work, and it's definitely taken some time. But as far as you are a very relatively young guy, you got a long working career in front of you still, and you've done awesome to this part. I think, as you mentioned earlier, the compounding effect only means that it is going to be even faster and even better over the next, the next 20 years is going to be a much larger version of what you've done the first 20 years. So congratulations to you guys for doing it. And one of the things that we hear all the time is that, you can't get ahead in America. You can't get ahead in farming. You just, there are no opportunities for people. The economy's broken, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you are exactly proof that that's a bunch of crap. So I guess I'm curious, do you think a person can get ahead in farming now?
Absolutely. I absolutely think there's all kinds of opportunities. I think the key thing is you can't do it the way that the 5th generation ranch is doing it though. You're not only like starting at a different point, you're playing an entirely different game than the 5th generation ranch or even the 2nd generation. If you're starting from scratch, you need to be creative and you need to find your niche and focus on cash flow. And it's absolutely possible. And I think it's probably possible anywhere. I'm doing it in Vermont, which is not typical, and we've done well. And it's, we're in a dairy neighborhood. We shouldn't be able to compete with dairies, but we can compete with dairies for anything we need.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mutual relationships for sure. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the world is just waiting to be taken, just make it what you want it.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, like I say, people like you are absolutely proof because you have done it, right? And there are lots of people that like to talk, but you've done it. You're a case where I think the exception or the the counterexample proves the rule. So works out fantastically well.
Yeah, and it takes good mentors. That's something I think we could have gotten a lot farther early in my career if I had found better mentors, or at least any mentors. I was really ignorant through my 20s that I kind of knew it all. That was the biggest mistake I made.
Aren't we all, sadly? that's the greatest part of your 30s is you realize how little you know in your 20s, right?
Yes, exactly. The 30s are very humbling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, well, congratulations to you. Thanks for being willing to do this. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I think it's a great way of life. I'm as free as you can be, and that is something I mean. Sole proprietorship, owning a business is the epitome of freedom in my mind.
Awesome. That sounds really good. Well, Josh, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks for tuning in to Ranchonomics Stories. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with a friend or family member who you think would find it helpful too. Be sure to subscribe and follow the show so you don't miss next week's story.